So I think broadly, we wanted to focus on things that were related to protecting our democracy and sort of the fundamentals of, America, what we think makes our country able to function, and what we see Trump as being a major threat to. So things like, deporting people, citizens of our own country, or taking away voter rights, or slashing funding on really essential government services. All of those things are, in my opinion, crises and like very urgent to focus on. And so that, to me, is one of the primary purposes of our group, is to push back against that. People use the word resistance. I think that's an appropriate term for, what's going on right now.
Today on Saving Democracy, I'm speaking with Jessica Lockie and Cindy Douglas about their experiences in getting an Indivisible group started in Brattleboro, Vermont. Hi everyone, I'm Mike Palmer. Please join me for this engaging chat. We'll talk about some of the challenges and encouraging successes of this new group. I think you'll find it helpful for your own organizing work. Let's get started. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'd like to start out by asking a little bit about each of you, about your background and how you came to be involved in the Indivisible group in Brattleboro. Jessica?
Sure. Yeah, I can kick us off. First of all, thank you for having us. This is great to speak with you. A little bit about my background. So I got into political organizing when I lived in New York City. It was during the time that Bernie Sanders launched his campaign for president in 2015 or so. And I had never really been involved in politics or community organizing. And I just remember hearing him speak and seeing the response to him, and everyone was like, wow, this guy is speaking the truth and like the leader that we need right now. He's, really challenging the norms, and he's pushing for this vision of the country that no one else really is. And so there was just this huge groundswell of support, especially in New York, like all these creative people and really smart and accomplished people coming together to try and get him elected. And I sort of found my footing in community organizing through that. Just like, I realized if I set a time for a meeting and people showed up, then I could be the meeting leader. And like, it was that easy. It was just like, do it, just send the email, just put up the event. And that was really, really empowering for me, just to realize that like, I didn't need any special certification or training or anything to just do something. And obviously he did not get elected, but I sort of continued that community organizing in New York and founded a group there that worked on more local and state issues. And then I moved up to Vermont in 2021 and married. I had a baby and was really removed from politics for a while. And, there were quiet years with Biden being president and nothing felt quite as urgent. And then when Trump was elected again, it felt like 2016 all over again. Like, I have to get involved. I have to do something. And luckily, there were a ton of other really, smart, great people in town. I met Cindy through organizing this group and a handful of other people. And we just sort of came together and, put up the structure for a new group, and it's really taken off in the last couple of months.
Yes. Cindy, how did you get involved?
I would say probably my first sort of introduction to anything political was during the pandemic, and seeing how something like that was politicized, and it was difficult, having a child who was in school, and we sort of did the at-home school thing while both working from home. And then, as the same thing as Jess, you had the quiet years. My background has been in corporate America, sort of climbing the ladder. There's a lot of sort of internal politics there. So after sort of, this election and everything that's been going on, and learning about the local Indivisible group through other sort of action groups in town, and especially after our representative Becca Ballant was elected, like hearing her speak in really sort of just layperson terms, is very inspiring to me, that she can sort of talk to anybody. That sort of gave me that oomph I needed to sort of join the group and kind of see what we can do in our tiny town.
Your town isn't really tiny, but it's not a big city. For people who don't know, Brattleboro is in the southern part of Vermont. You can look it up on the map. Maybe I'll put a little map in the podcast when we get this done. That's very helpful. I suspect that many people across the country have similar experiences similar to what you just described and got involved with Indivisible or a local group in somewhat a similar way. Could one of you share what the process was for forming an Indivisible group as opposed to something else?
Yeah, I can speak to that. So our initial sort of launch of the group was just me and our co-founder, Sage, Ruth, and we kind of got together and said, like, what do we want to do with this group? How do we want it to be structured? What do we want the focus to be on? And Sage had found Indivisible, I think, just like through, doomsday, like Googling about like, how do we save America? Indivisible came up and they had a really good handbook or like guidebook for how to get started. And it was specific to the state and the community that you live in. So, it had some tips for if you're in a deep red state, how do you organize? What are the levers that you have to be most effective versus, if you're in a blue state, your actions are obviously going to be very different. So I thought that was a really, tactical and useful and thoughtful guidebook. And I had heard of Indivisible before back in 2016, but they had launched sort of in opposition to Trump. And again, when Biden was president, I didn't hear much from them, but it was great to sort of get refreshed on the work that they're doing, how they offer support for new groups, and how they have this infrastructure for chapters all across the country to focus on things that are important to them and that are relevant to their areas, but still link up to this massive, nationwide network where you have funding, you have resources for how to organize, you have connections, you have all these things that a large organization can offer, but also the flexibility to focus on what your individual chapter should look like.
So that, I believe, is helpful for people watching or listening in who might want to join a group or might want to form one of their own. So after you found Indivisible online, and how easy was it to connect with them and form a group? Can you explain a little bit of the process there?
Yeah, I can talk about how we got started. And then Cindy, if you want to talk about just sort of how you found us and got involved initially. So Indivisible has weekly meetings with the statewide coalition. So Judith Stadman is the leader of the New England faction of Indivisible. And so that's an easy way to get plugged in. Like if you're looking to form a group or just want to know like what we're doing at the state level, those calls are really helpful. And then National Indivisible also has calls where the founders, Ezra and Leah, talk about like what are the issues that we're focused on right now, what are some tips for organizing, and kind of a higher level view of the work of Indivisible. So those are two good places to get started. Their website, indivisible.org, also has a ton of resources like how to run a meeting, how do you set an agenda, how do you collect email addresses and like reach out to members of your group, all of the really like tactical and specific guidance that someone who has never organized before can read through and get a launching pad to get started. So I actually felt like there was just a ton of support for us to get ramped up. And then really we just put our group on the Indivisible website. We like registered as a group. We found some meeting space. Our first meeting was at the public library. 12 people showed up. We talked about what we wanted to do, what things we wanted to focus on, how we wanted to get organized, and really just went from there. And we have a lot of people in our group from just really diverse backgrounds, professionally and otherwise, who just bring a lot of skills in terms of like, computer work or organizing or like facilitating a meeting. Like we were really able to leverage everyone's skills to create something that's, has great synergy and the potential for great impact.
Cindy, anything you want to add to that?
As far as how I found the group, I think Jess and some of the original few members, they did a good job of connecting with organizations that already existed in town. And so I had already signed up for, like a newsletter, but I also, was using the Indivisible site for a lot of like the guidebook and finding sort of local chapters, and so those things kind of came together. And one of the ways that like this group really utilizes sort of soliciting members and things like that is like through Google Forms, and so that was how I initially signed up to join the group, and then I got more information regarding that, as well as sort of how they were trying to sort of stand up the group operationally.
How long has the group been in existence?
4 months. I think our first meeting of 12 people was late January. So yeah, not that long.
I assume you have a sense of what your purpose is as the group. Is that correct?
Yeah. I would say so.
So first of all, what is it? And secondly, how did you go about deciding what your purpose would be?
Yeah, so I think broadly, we wanted to focus on things that were related to protecting our democracy and sort of the fundamentals of, America, what we think makes our country able to function, and what we see Trump as being a major threat to. So things like, deporting people, citizens of our own country, or taking away voter rights, or slashing funding on really essential government services. All of those things are, in my opinion, crises and like very urgent to focus on. And so that, to me, is one of the primary purposes of our group, is to push back against that. People use the word resistance. I think that's an appropriate term for, what's going on right now. But then also more forward-looking work, like, supporting elections in swing states, or replacing people to flip the balance of the House and the Senate, focusing on specific policy issues that might impact people at the state or federal level. So, thinking about what do we need to do long term to not just save our democracy, but also put in the infrastructure to make sure that it is protected long term, and that the issues that we care about have a chance of progressing.
Cindy, you want to add anything to that?
As far as like the vision and sort of the strategy, I think both Jess and another member, Katie, they've always sort of talked about how it's really important to have, that strategy. Otherwise, groups like grassroots groups like this sort of eventually sort of dissolve, because you've got everybody trying to do everything and, possibly getting burnt out. And so I think that was part of the reason they established sort of this operational group. They sort of solicited the members that had already signed up, who was interested in what skills, align with the needs. And then from there, we sort of, after a couple of meetings, had a list of, all of the things that Jess just mentioned, saving democracy, rapid response, things like that. What are the things that people want the group to focus on, so that we could really sort of aggregate that data and come up with sort of our action groups that are really going to try to tackle these things at the local level.
Yeah, I bet people would be surprised, or some people listening in on this would be surprised at how many people in Brattleboro are involved in Indivisible Brattleboro right now. So can you tell us how many people, I don't know whether you call them members or not, but are actively involved?
Yeah, it's hard to say. Like we don't have a specific definition of a member. We just consider, if you want to call yourself a member, then you're a member of our group. On our listserv, we have 200 people who have signed up for our like new member form and said, I want to be a part of Indivisible. And we ask a few questions about, where they live and why they want to be a part of the group and what issues are most important to them. But otherwise, it's a pretty low bar to entry. So I would say we have about 200 members. We usually have around 30 to 50 at our meetings, depending on what else is going on that day. We had a rally I guess it was this month, April 5th.
Mm-hmm.
And about 2,000 people showed up for the rally, and our meeting was right before the rally. And I think we had maybe 60 people or so at that meeting. It was a very large meeting, but I think that was mostly because people were showing up for the rally afterwards.
Uh-huh. And do you meet in person or online or both?
We offer a Zoom link to people who want to join virtually. Cindy, I think it was your camera that was set up last time, right? To allow people to participate in the meeting virtually, which is awesome. But the majority of people join in person.
Uh-huh. So that's technically, how do you do that? You do it with an iPhone or some other kind of system?
So because I came from a world I was already like, like a remote employee for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
It's important to me to like, when you're doing something like that, for people to be able to hear. I actually have like a conference speaker. I had bought it a while back on Amazon. I know it was before all of this, but and it works really well as, just you put it in sort of the center of the room, and the people online can hear everybody. And then I also, the camera that I'm using now, I just hooked that up to my laptop.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can also use your iPhone as the camera. So it works well.
So you don't need a lot of fancy equipment is basically what I'm getting at. And
Yeah.
the microphone in the center, for those not familiar with this, it basically picks up voices from all around and does a passably good job for most of those things, depending on the size of the room and how loud people speak and that sort of thing. But that does enable people who can't get there personally or for one reason or another to participate. It also makes it possible to record the meeting. Do you do that as well?
We do not. We are, doing our best to balance privacy, security, concerns about, potentially bad actors participating in the group, with the desire to be inclusive and open and, let anyone who wants to participate. We don't record the meetings because we are a little bit nervous about, people later being tagged as part of Indivisible, if they're concerned about their own safety for whatever reason. But we do take pretty extensive notes and share those out afterwards.
Yeah, so the only reason I ask about the recording is mainly for people who can't be there at the hour. So some groups hold meetings during the day, during the working hours, and that precludes people who have to be on the job from participating. But the notes would give them at least a sense of what went on at the meeting and so forth. So you have around 200 people active in one way or another in your group now. Is there any, are you making any effort to differentiate the organization in any way? So creating subgroups or particular projects that a group is working on or anything of that nature?
Yeah. Cindy, do you want to take this? Because you've been working on the strategy.
Yeah, I had talked a little bit about it earlier. So we sent out the survey, sort of asking the broader group, what are you most interested in? So there was a large number of people that were interested in sort of the action, the protests, the rallies, etc. So we have a group for that, and then rapid response was another one of high interest. So that's something where, they'll really work on sort of the ICE related rapid response items where they can also work closely with other organizations in town that have vulnerable populations. There's another one that is more around really just democracy, sort of voter rights, making sure that we're really working on all of those, whether it's working with your representatives, things like that. And then another one which the group found interesting is we have truth and sort of the public awareness, sort of to fight all of the disinformation that's out there. So that's something that at our next meeting we'll be launching these sort of action groups where people can really, we'll have that distributed leadership sort of model, and people can start taking, action within their smaller groups.
Are groups able to function more or less on their own, the ones that you just described, or is there any process where they need to check in with a steering committee or central leadership or anything of that nature? Or is there any sense that they need to get approval for what they're doing?
We did create, sort of like a rapid response type of process, sort of in conjunction with these operational groups and guidelines around how these groups would operate, like who the contact person would be to sort of come back to the leadership and like the operations group as needed, so that I think, we'll be able to sort of keep a pulse on, what's happening strategically with that group. And, if you think about like the action and resistance groups, right, they're going to want information, from the other groups as well, because it's all tied in together. So there's definitely some guidelines. Sage, Jessica mentioned her earlier. She has amazing sort of operational chops. And, she created from all of our disparate documents, sort of this, guidebook for the groups as they meet. Here are the things that we'll need from you, and contact people. Here's the email to sort of utilize if you need to, ask questions to the overall leadership group.
I've seen, as I've looked at different groups and people doing this kind of social action organizing, different levels of experience and expertise in the things that you just described. So some people come to this activity with a background, let's just say broadly in the humanities. They've worked in some area where you didn't have a high level of organization needed. Maybe they were working on their own or working with a couple of other people, but they don't have the kind of background and experience that at least I know Cindy has said she does, and probably from what I've seen, Jessica has as well. And so some of the skills and resources that you bring to this process, other groups actually don't have as much of that available. And one of the things that I'm looking into is how do you help people who don't have that background gain that level of not expertise, but skill level in just basic organizing of humans doing things. And one of the questions that shows up in that process is, well, do we have to get approval before we can go forward to do whatever it is we just wanted to do? And if I heard you correctly, I think what you're saying is a big part of that not approval process, but that process is the guidelines. So you set up, here's what we stand for, here's the things we are going to try to accomplish, here's what we don't want to do, maybe you have some of that in there as well. And then the individual groups, the individual indivisible groups are expected to adhere to and conform with the broad guidelines. And basically, the other aspect of that is communication. So it doesn't necessarily mean, I use the word approval, but it may mean you may want to use the word just checking in or letting people know that here's what we're doing, so that you are developing a brand, and the brand of Indivisible Brattleboro will stand for something in the minds of other people, and you want to make sure that it's consistent with everything you've laid out in your purpose statement of purpose and your guidelines and so forth. Let me switch to communication. There are two aspects of communication. One is internal communication among yourselves, and the other is communication with the outside world. And one of the devices or means for doing that is a website. Do you have a website? And if you don't, have you thought about creating one?
We do not have a website right now. I think we have a wiki page, right, Cindy? So, the thing with all of these assets, like having a website, having a Facebook page, having social media, all of that stuff takes time and effort to maintain. And what I've seen in the past with some groups is they spend a lot of time like building a beautiful website and putting all the information on there. But if no one's maintaining it, then that information is quickly outdated. And you've just spent a ton of time building a website when you could have been doing like something that was a little more, focused on the mission of the group. So I think our strategy so far has been to really leverage the existing resources from Indivisible. They have a Mobilize website, mobilize.us, where you could post all of your events on there. And it has a pretty wide reach beyond just, our local community. Anyone who's on that website could see any events anywhere. We're also plugged into the We Can network, the Windham County Action Network, which is a fantastic resource. There's volunteers there who basically just collect all of the information about all the events going on, and send out a really comprehensive and fantastic newsletter once a week that says, here's all the events and all the information you need to know. So we don't need to recreate those things for events. Like we can just plug into existing resources. We do have a Facebook page that we sort of adopted. I guess there was a Brattleboro Indivisible group maybe 10 years ago, but around 2016 that formed. So we stumbled upon this Facebook page that was Brattleboro Indivisible that didn't seem to be currently maintained. And we reached out to the admins and said, hey, we're the new group. Can we get in here? So there are some people posting on there. Maybe, long term we'll have a website, but right now all of our documents and our organization is done on Google Drive. So people who need access to, the documents and the resources to do the work can get access to those. But otherwise, I think we really have what we need through Indivisible in terms of like a public facing landing page.
So you mentioned Wind Can, I guess.
We can.
We can.
Yeah, like we can.
Right. So is that an umbrella organization for social action groups within your county? Did I get that right?
Yeah. I don't know exactly the history of how the group came to be, but it is, the whole goal of it is to provide a way for local residents to find out about events and the work of local organizations. So it's really, kind of just an inventory and an archive of all the stuff going on in the community.
And who maintains that? Is it an organization that maintains that?
It is a group of volunteers. George Carville is the main contact we've been working with right now. But I think it's just a handful of residents from Windham County who came together to set up this resource, and now they have a lot of momentum behind it. They have several hundred people on the listserv. Yeah, they have a website that you could go to. You could check out basically the latest newsletter with all of the most recent events coming up, and then a little bit about like pictures, calendar, an about page, things like that.
So anybody with access to the web can find that, I assume, and learn more about it there. And so that brings up the question about collaboration with other groups. There are different groups that are working on a response to the Trump administration. So Move On is doing what it's doing. I put together a list of actually more than 5 the other day. It's closer to 10 national organizations that are doing something that involves local organizing, not just, at the national level. One of them is Third Act. Are you familiar with Third Act?
I've heard of it. I am not super familiar with the details.
Okay, so Third Act was started by Bill McKibben and a few other people that he knows about 2 years ago. The basic idea is people over 65, which obviously neither of you are, so you wouldn't have been approached by Third Act, are still able to do something, would like to get involved. And at the time, the Third Act had 2 areas of interest because they, people who were forming it said, well, some of us want to work on climate action matters, and others of us want to work on political organizing. And so they basically formed Third Act with those 2 poles. It's a national organization. There are local chapters in Vermont and other states. And I raised the question about collaborating with other groups because while you do want to have your own identity and work on your own things, there's a real value in doing that. There is also a value in certain times with joining hands with other groups. So the April 5 action, hands off action, was actually a collaboration of a lot of national groups working together to pull that off on a national level. So that's why I raised the question. Have you had any particular challenges or difficulties in getting your Indivisible group going?
I don't think so. Obviously it's not like a completely easy and smooth process to stand up a new group. There's a lot of growing pains. There's, conflicts and tensions that just naturally arise, but that's sort of, just part of the nature of starting something new. Like we're kind of figuring things out as we go. There's a lot of different personalities, a lot of different backgrounds that are coming together, and we're sort of working through it. What is it, like the norming, forming, storming, and
Yeah.
whatever that is, like storming is a big part of it. It's a big part of it. So we really are in that stage of just trying to figure out what are our group norms? How do we work together? How do we make sure that everyone is included, regardless of whether they are good at Google Drive or, can be on the Signal app? Like, how do we actually make sure that we're including everyone and hearing everyone's voices? I think maybe the biggest point of friction that we've had so far is just sort of figuring out like what does our group stand for? There have been a few people reaching out to us saying, will you take a stand on Gaza, Israel? Or what about like the increased police budget? And I think those are, one is super global, international policy, and the other is super local. And, interestingly enough, they are both like 2 of the most controversial issues that people are talking about in our town. It's very divisive to take a stand on Gaza or Israel. We have a lot of Jewish people in our town, but we also have a lot of people who are, rightfully distraught over what's happening in Gaza. And so that's a divisive issue. And it's been hard for us to just kind of figure out, do we take a stand on this? Like, obviously a lot of people in our group have a strong opinion on it, but is it the right place for our group to take a stand or do something about it? And regardless of the answer, how do we set up policies and protocols and decision frameworks for responding to things in the future. Like if we don't take a stand on Gaza, Israel, but then some other, even Ukraine, Russia, like, do we take a stand on that? Or do we just have a blanket policy of like, we're just not going to get involved in international conflict? So figuring all that out and making sure that we are being bold and progressive and, paying attention to these very important issues, but also keeping our focused and, making sure that we can actually have an impact on the things that we want to focus on. That's really not even a challenge, but just a balancing act.
Cindy, you want to add anything to that?
I think she covered most of what I was going to say. We definitely, that was the big thing, was getting over that hurdle of, what is our strategy? Because otherwise you tend to just, you're getting hit with, like 50 different things a day. Which one of those things are we all gonna work on? And I think, sort of circling back to your other comment, or when you were talking about third act, it's been really good to partner with other organizations in town, especially with like sort of organizing the next thing is, we've got 5051, which is a more recent organization that popped up, and then another one that Brattleboro Area Action, and just everybody's got so many different skills and connections and knowledge that it's really great to work with folks, and some of these topics are very polarizing. And so I think, to Jess's point, group norms and things like that are very important.
Yeah, so in the work that I do, looking at organizations of all kinds, not just volunteer organizations, but nonprofit organizations, for-profit organizations, startups, and so forth, one of the things that is critical for helping to solve the problem that you've just been describing is having a thoroughly well-developed understanding of the purpose of the organization that has been reduced to some kind of written document. So this is what we stand for. This is what we're working to achieve. So if you're going to work for an iPhone company, you don't expect them to make automobiles. And if you're going, so it's actually, in terms of human organization, getting a group of people together to jointly achieve something, you have to have something you want to achieve. And if you're trying to achieve 5 different things simultaneously, you will achieve none of them. So that's the thing that you're working with. And every group of any size has to work through its own self-definition. What is it that we're about and trying to accomplish? And you're going through that process now. And I just wanted to highlight that because a lot of people from other groups across the country will be going through the same thing you're going through. Many of them started 4 months ago. Perhaps the vast majority of them started in response to the election of Donald Trump and probably got going sometime in January. Even if there was a preceding or previous indivisible group in whatever location they were, it probably became moribund and didn't do anything and just kind of faded. There may be a Facebook page still or something of that nature, but it wasn't reactivated. People like you brought in something and started something new. And so that's part of the to use the cliche, growing pains, if you will. And I guess the question is, have you looked for any resources that would help you work through the issues that you've just talked about?
I don't think we have. I guess no. The answer is no. Like, not specifically any resources that we've really leveraged to work through this. It really is just a collection of all of our skills and experience in in organizing or in operations, figuring out like, how do we set a goal? How do we measure that goal? My background is in healthcare. I work at a health tech company right now, and we're really big on OKRs, objectives and key results. Like, what is your big picture goal for the group, and then how do you actually measure that you've had success on those, or on that goal? So we're loosely following approaches like those that we're familiar with, maybe from our professional lives, to set up some structure for the groups. We have a guiding mission statement for the group overall. We have the action groups, which will launch this weekend. And I think once we have those action groups set up with some objectives and key results, or, tactics, or whatever you want to call them, that will really form the structure of like, here are the 5 big things that we do, or here are the 5 big objectives for our group. We're going to measure how successful we've been at making progress on those 5 things, and that will sort of lead us through the year.
Yeah, that is one of the key tools that organizations have for cohering, coordinating work, cooperating, making sure everybody is working in the same direction. So I use an image of you have a truck that's in the ditch, and you have to somehow get it out of the ditch if you're going to continue on. And in that moment, everything is focused on getting the truck out of the ditch. It's not on anything else. And you might use a rope to try to pull it out of the ditch. You might get several people behind the truck and push to try to push it out of the ditch. But the purpose, the objective, the big O in the OKR that you just mentioned, is getting the truck out of the ditch. Now, and once you get the truck out of the ditch, you may learn, well, there's another objective we want. We want to get to the next town to have something to eat. And then there's another objective after that. But you organize people to do things around specific things that you want to accomplish. And that's what I think you've been describing there. You mentioned a while ago that it takes, well, I don't know whether you use the word money, but it does take resources to do some of the work. And I guess the question I would raise is whether you've given thought up to now, or plan to, as to whether you want to try to raise money, or whether you want to, how you want to collect resources to help do the work that you're doing.
Yeah, we do have an ActBlue account that was set up through Indivisible. So that's an example of a resource that we were able to have access to through Indivisible National. We set up an ActBlue account. People have donated. We have not a ton of money in the bank, but enough to keep us going, for our immediate needs in terms of the cost of meeting space. We actually pay for childcare at all of our meetings to try and enable parents to be able to come and not have to, babysit while they're participating in the meeting. And we do some other fundraisers, like, for example, we are selling lawn signs that say resist, various other phrases that were actually really popular at our recent rally. So we purchased a whole bunch of them and are selling them for just a little bit more than cost, $15 each. And so that money will go into our bank account to pay for, whatever comes up. We can also apply for grants through Indivisible National. We've sort of held off on doing that up to this point, just because we have enough funds right now to cover costs, but that's always an option down the road for us.
Yeah, so just to let people who don't know, to emphasize that last point, I don't know where Indivisible gets its money, but it obviously has quite a bit, at least to keep the national organization going, and some resources to funnel out to local groups such as your group. And there's a process on the website to get a grant, and you can get a grant of $150 or $2,000, or as long as it's documented and justified as to what you're going to do with the money, and you do it. It's not all that complicated to get some resources. So people in other areas, if you're thinking about putting together a local Indivisible group, that's one of the things that is a resource available to you. Have you given any thought to becoming a legal entity as as a corporate status, a nonprofit that could receive donations on a tax exempt basis?
We have thought about it. Actually, one of our co-founders, Sage, she works in nonprofit finance. That's her professional background. So, we've gotten some good thought around this. We landed on not forming a new entity. We're able to fundraise through ActBlue, through the Indivisible, legal entity. So there really was no additional benefit to us. We're a group of all volunteers, and maintaining our status as some sort of legal entity is just another bit of work for us. So there really was no benefit at this time, and it would have been, an additional investment of our time.
Okay. So I really appreciate both of you making time to be with us today on Organize to Save Democracy, and I am really encouraged by what you're doing. I hope this will be something valuable to groups in other parts of the country and to people who may be thinking of either joining or forming an indivisible group. It's really not all that difficult, and it's, as I think Jessica said at the outset, it's a matter of just starting doing it, getting going. Get another person, maybe two other people, sit down in a room and say, we got to do something. Let's this is this device, or this is this resource called Indivisible. Do we want to take advantage of that? How would we go about doing it? And just get started. You don't need permission. You don't need anybody to bless you or tell you that it's okay. And as I put it sometimes, to save democracy, start by practicing it. And that's what you're doing. So I really am grateful for you making the time to be with me today. And you have a great evening.
You too. Thanks so much.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us. We'll be back next week with another lively conversation about saving democracy at the grassroots level. Saving Democracy is a podcast feature of Together for Good. I'm Mike Palmer. See you soon.